In the midst of World War II, the Japanese expanded their empire by seizing the Philippines from America. They interned thousands of Allied nationals to obtain a firmer grasp on the Philippines. The citizens in the Santo Tomas camp endured years of starvation, mistreatment, and physical and psychological injuries until liberated by American forces on February 3, 1945. Their internment raises an ethical question. People today need to consider if tragic treatment of fellow humans is a price they're willing to pay for a triumph in war.
America's bright jewel of the Orient since the Spanish-American War, Manila, was the capital of the Philippines and a party city. Americans flocked to Manila with its many jobs. Karen Lewis, an internee, said, "We were pampered, isolated American colonials abroad. Things were about to change."
Even with rumors of war, Americans stayed in Manila. William Moule, a Philippines resident, said, "I firmly believe Japan wouldn't, couldn't, and dared not ever go to war with such a country as the USA. I actually felt sorry for Japan, about to be slaughtered without a chance." The United States knew war was coming, but did not evacuate the Philippines, as an evacuation would be a negative statement about the Army.
After Pearl Harbor, Japan bombed Manila. General Douglas MacArthur told the newspapers the Americans had the situation well in hand. But it soon became clear the Americans had underestimated their opponent. MacArthur was forced to withdraw. When he left the Philippines, he made the famous promise of "I shall return."
Japanese troops entered Manila 2 days after the New Year to signify the beginning of a new reign. They told the American Emergency Committee to find places for an internment camp for Allied nationals. The University of Santo Tomas's Dominican priests offered the university, and the first internees entered Santo Tomas in January of 1942.
Initially, Commandant Hitoshi Tamayasu and 16 Japanese oversaw 3,000 in Santo Tomas. Internee Earl Carroll was appointed the leader by the Japanese. He made an internee government, hoping it would minimize Japanese interference with the camp. At the beginning of internment, 3 internees tried to escape. They were caught, beaten, and killed.
That kind of taught most of us not to even think about escaping.
I don't think anybody chooses circumstances. To me, what's amazing about the human character is how we meet the challenges when adversity confronts us.
For the internees, that was creating a sense of normalcy. Jobs were created, including barbers, dishwashers, and selling food.
It was actually like a city.
Then, internees had permission to build shanties.
We were fortunate enough to get a permit to build a native shanty right on the campus, and our shanty town was known as Lammerville.
Even with the tragedy of internment, internees still managed to find joy through entertainment by Dave Harvey and the Dyer sisters. Internees also played sports, including boxing.
My 2 younger brothers and I were all in this tournament, and my youngest brother ended up getting in the finals, and I guess he finished second. He got a trophy for it, which was a bamboo mug.
Classes were taught by intern teachers.
We had our classes on the roof, which was where the university had their laboratory classes.
In 1943, elections were held because internees weren't happy with the Japanese-appointed Earl Carroll. Carroll Grinnell replaced Carroll as chairman of the administration. He was one of the most controversial heads of camp. He used his own business contacts and money to help internees who needed it. But 6 months later, when Earl Carroll was re-elected, Grinnell refused to step down. By doing so, he had taken away the internees' right to vote, one of their last rights remaining in internment.
Santo Tomas was becoming very crowded.
Kind of crammed in there like sardines in a can.
The new internees received no sympathy from those already living in the camp, as the newcomers were thought to have had more soft time outside the camp. In actuality, living outside was in many ways much harder and more nerve-wracking than living in the camp.
A typhoon hit the camp on the night of November 14, 1943. It caused flooding and blew down many shanties. The internee administration hadn't warned the internees because they thought it would cause panic. This led to a great loss of food.
In February 1944, the Japanese military became stricter, discharging the civilian deputies and putting themselves directly in charge of the camp. The internee administration was disbanded and replaced by an internee committee made up of only 3 men. As the Japanese lost more battles, more internee privileges were canceled, including movies and nightly music broadcasts. Hunger was constant, and to combat it, the Japanese told internees to plant gardens. No one had enough calories to do even that. All food that parents could spare went to their children.
I think they sacrificed a lot. In other words, fed us more than they fed themselves.
Things became even worse in the fall of 1944 when death rates shot up due to malnutrition. On Christmas, YMCA trucks showed up full of food, but the Japanese turned them away, saying the internees had plenty. Internees were forced to trade their jewelry and other precious treasures to the Japanese guards in exchange for food. Some even ate the pets they smuggled in at the beginning of internment.
The Japanese considered liberating Santo Tomas themselves, but Earl Carroll urged them not to, knowing the situation would be much worse if the internees were left to fend for themselves. Rumors circulated through the Philippines that the Japanese were going to kill all the internees in their various camps. On February 3rd, American dive bombers flew low over Santo Tomas and dropped a pair of goggles with a note on them. Roll out the barrel. Santa Claus is coming Sunday or Monday. The date was wrong, as the camp was liberated that night.
When the tanks came rolling into the camp, they actually broke the main gate, crashed through the main gate.
There was joy and celebration from the 3,800 internees.
It was a bunch of holidays all linked together.
But tragedy continued when Lieutenant Colonel Toshio Hayashi and 62 Japanese took 267 internees hostage in the education building. Surrender was a disgrace for Japanese officers, so they used the internees to negotiate a safe passage out of the city.
The Japanese bombed Santo Tomas for days after liberation. The Japanese defended Manila fiercely in the Battle of Manila.
And they slaughtered an awful lot of the Filipinos. There was over 100,000 Filipinos that were killed in that battle.
After the Battle of Manila, internees were allowed to go home. Some were permanently affected by malnutrition, resulting in many health issues. There were psychological issues as well, including sleeping problems and depression. These problems were labeled as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Modern research explains the concept of inherited trauma, which highlights how extreme stress can alter someone's microRNA in their blood, brain, and sperm. The internees' PTSD could be genetically passed to their children.
Some people felt being interned was worth it, as they learned to appreciate the simpler pleasures and value their freedom.
Patience is the best quality that I got out of Santo Tomas.
The internees were never paid reparations.
That has never happened, and as a matter of fact, there was a group of people that worked very hard trying to convince the Japanese that they needed to pay us.
The internees were exposed to horrible tragedy and triumphed by adapting to their dire circumstances. As countries go to war today, it is important to remember Santo Tomas. While the internees triumphed in small ways during the war years, echoes of tragedy linger in them and their children still. This is not the only way the tragedy of internment continues. Modern internment camps still exist today, continuing the seemingly endless cycle of horrible tragedy and small triumphs.
Internee Emily Van Sickle said it best. We, in Santo Tomas, learned to exist without the freedom that we had taken for granted before the war. May we who regain our priceless freedom be ever vigilant in guarding it, not only for ourselves, but for, and with, all our fellow human beings, against any who would deny the just rights of others. Dawn had come for us. How far the dawn for all.